a massive blob of dangerous toxic waste known as the elephant's foot, a deadly heart condition plaguing those born after the disaster, and terrifying hidden hotspots of toxic radiation. The elephant's foot is one of the most disturbing remnants of the Chernobyl disaster. It's a large mass of graphite and concrete that formed underneath reactor number 4 after the explosion. When the reactor melted down, the materials that were inside started to mix and solidify, creating this massive, oddly shaped toxic lump. It got its name because from a distance it kind of looks like an elephant's foot with large bulbous structures sticking out. The problem with this thing was that it emitted terrifying amounts of radiation right after the explosion. In fact, at the time it was one of the most radioactive spots on planet Earth. People working to clean it up or get closer to it received lethal doses of radiation just by being near. In the years following the disaster, it became clear that the elephant's foot wasn't just dangerous for people who were close by though, it also had an ongoing impact on the environment. The radiation affected the soil, air, and water, and it made cleanup operations even more difficult. For decades, scientists have been worried about how much more radiation might still be leaking from it. One of the most disturbing medical effects from the Chernobyl disaster is a condition known as the Chernobyl heart. It's a congenital heart defect that's been found in people born after the disaster, and it's believed to be caused by the radiation exposure that their mothers experienced while pregnant. The condition causes the heart to develop abnormally, which of course causes a long list of problems, including heart failure, and unfortunately the number of youngsters born with this condition is believed to be much higher than originally reported, and the full extent of it is still not fully understood. A lot of them were born to parents who were exposed to radiation during the aftermath of the explosion, but it wasn't just the immediate survivors of the disaster that were affected, it's also the generations that followed, and it's not just the heart that's impacted either. Other birth defects, cancers, developmental issues, all been linked to the radiation, and some scientists worry that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The death zone around Chernobyl, also known as the exclusion zone, is a 30-kilometer radius surrounding the site of the explosion. After the disaster, the area was deemed uninhabitable because of the extremely high levels of radiation. People living within this zone were evacuated, and the area has remained largely off limits ever since. Even today, it's not entirely safe to enter the zone. Some parts have been deemed safe enough for tourists to visit, but there are still areas where radiation levels are high enough to cause serious health risks. One of the most unsettling things about the death zone is how nature has taken over. Wildlife has returned to the area, and some species like wolves and wild boar are surviving in a landscape that was once populated by humans. And while on one hand nature is healing itself, scientists are concerned about how the radiation might affect these animals over time. More on that in a bit. The death zone is this eerie place though, where time seems to have stopped, but the dangers lurking there are very real. Even though the exclusion zone is mostly off limits, the real fear is all the hidden hotspots of radiation, areas where radiation levels are significantly higher than the surrounding environment. They can be found in random places like under trees, in buildings, or in the soil, and they're incredibly difficult to detect without specialized equipment. Some of these hotspots have been measured at radiation levels so high that a person spending even a short time in the area would receive a deadly dose. The worrying part about these hotspots is that we don't know exactly how widespread they are either. Even scientists studying the area have been caught off guard by these invisible pockets of radiation. In some cases, the radiation is buried deep underground, and it's nearly impossible to predict where it might show up next. In the long term, these hotspots could cause serious health issues for anyone who ventures into the area, even if avoiding the exclusion zone. See, one of the scariest things about radiation is that it's invisible. You can't see it, smell it, or taste it, and it can seep into the environment in ways that are hard to track. When the Chernobyl reactor exploded, radiation was released into the atmosphere and spread over large areas of Europe. While we know that radiation has a very real dangerous effect on human health, the real fear is how it can stay hidden in the environment. It's in the soil, the water, even the air, and you might not even know you're being exposed to it until it's too late. Today, certain crops in areas surrounding the exclusion zone still have radioactive traces, and scientists worry that it could affect the food supply for generations. It's not just the immediate aftermath of the explosion that's dangerous, it's the long-term, ongoing exposure to low-level radiation that's still having an impact. And the health consequences of radiation exposure might not show up until years down the road. The liquidators were thousands of workers, soldiers, and volunteers who were sent in to help clean up the Chernobyl disaster in the weeks and months following the explosion. They were tasked with containing the radiation, decontaminating the area, and preventing further damage. These people were exposed to high levels of radiation, and the effects were devastating. Some developed cancer, others suffered from organ damage, and a lot of them died in the years following the disaster. They were often given little to no protection from the radiation they were being exposed to. They were seen as disposable and sent in without proper safety gear or even adequate training. For years, their exposure to radiation was downplayed or just outright ignored. It wasn't until much later that the real extent of their suffering came to light. It's said that over 100,000 liquidators were exposed to harmful levels of radiation, and in the years since, a lot of them have developed serious health issues. The liquidators' story is definitely one of the darkest parts of the Chernobyl disaster. This is a group of people sent in to clean up a mess that they had no control over, paying the price with their lives. One of the ongoing concerns surrounding Chernobyl is the contamination of water. After the explosion, the reactor's cooling systems failed and large amounts of radioactive water were released into the environment. This water ended up in nearby rivers, lakes, and the groundwater. There's been efforts to clean things up, but the problem is far from solved. Radioactive particles are still found in nearby rivers and lakes. This means that both the environment and people living nearby are still at risk of exposure to radioactive water. The issue with radioactive water is that it can be difficult to track. The contamination can spread silently, affecting big areas of land and water over time. Radioactive particles can linger for decades, slowly working their way into the environment, and as I already discussed, this can and has led to long-term health issues. After the original concrete structure known as the sarcophagus started to degrade, a newer, larger sarcophagus was built around the Chernobyl reactor. The goal was to contain the radiation and prevent it from spreading further. The new safe confinement, as it's called, is this huge structure designed to last for at least 100 years. Now, while it is a major improvement over the original sarcophagus, there are still some concerns. First of all, it's only designed to last a century, and we have no real idea of what will happen to the thing once it starts to deteriorate. If it fails, the consequences could be catastrophic. The new safe confinement is designed to keep radiation contained, but there's always a possibility of something going wrong. For example, if the structure were to collapse or crack, there's a risk of radiation leaking into the environment. The idea that we have to rely on this temporary fix for such a long-term problem is a bit unsettling. The wildlife around Chernobyl has actually been doing pretty well since humans have left, but there's a pretty disturbing side to that. A lot of the animals are showing signs of mutations. Some are born with extra limbs, messed up faces, problems with their organs. Now, it's not like genetic mutations never happen in nature, but the fact that these kinds of mutations are more common in Chernobyl than in any other place is pretty telling. Scientists think radiation has a big part in these changes, and they're worried that over time this could cause some species to completely die off. Some mutations are small and hard to notice, but others are much more obvious, like animals with tumors, extra or missing body parts, or just high levels of radiation detected in their bodies. Some animals are still managing to survive quite well, though. It's just tough to say how all these mutations will affect their populations long term. But the idea that radiation might have changed the very genetic makeup of entire species in the area is a pretty scary thought. Finally, there are the phantom radio signals. These are mysterious, unexplained radio transmissions that people exploring the exclusion zone have reported hearing. The strange thing is, these signals often come through on frequencies that should be totally silent or unused. Urban explorers with radios have said they've picked up distorted voices or odd sounds that don't sound like your typical radio noise. Some even claim they've heard vague messages coming through. One theory is that this could be some kind of lingering electromagnetic effect from the nuclear disaster, but those who lean towards more paranormal stuff say the signals might be coming from the spirits of people who died during the disaster, trying to reach out through the radio. In the days following the Chernobyl disaster, dozens of lives were lost, but just 10 days later, there was a new threat in the form of potential nuclear steam explosions. There was now a concern about corium, a radioactive lava-like substance mixing with the water in the bubbler pools below. If that happened, it could cause a steam explosion, releasing even more radiation into the area. These explosions could have sent radioactive steam as far as Minsk, about 200 miles away. So to prevent this, the decision was made to drain the pools by opening the sluice gates. The problem was that these gates were controlled by valves located in a flooded underground annex next to Reactor 4. The path to the valves had been cleared, but the water was still knee-deep in some areas, thanks to firefighters who had used specialized hoses to make it passable. 3 men volunteered for the task: Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bezpolov, and Boris Boranov. Nobody thought they were going to survive, including these 3 who figured that they would die from radiation exposure, but they went ahead anyway, ready and willing to give up their lives in order to save hundreds of thousands of others. And miraculously, they succeeded, preventing an even worse disaster. Alexei Ananenko is still alive, now living in Kiev, as well as Valery Bezpolov. Unfortunately, Boris Boranov is no longer with us, but he survived 20 years after the mission, passing away in 2005 at the age of 64. All 3 have since been awarded the title Hero of Ukraine. This is Vasily Ignatenko. He was a Soviet firefighter, one of the first on the scene after the Chernobyl explosion in 1986. On that night, he and his team were called in to put out fires at the power plant, which had been caused by the debris from the exploded reactor. Ignatenko and his crew climbed up to the roof of the building, where they had to fight flames caused by radioactive material. They were dealing with fires, but at the same time, the radiation levels were severe. As they worked, they started feeling the effects of radiation sickness, nausea, weakness, and vomiting. The water system had been damaged in the blast, so they had to use hoses from a fire escape to put out the fires, but it wasn't enough to protect them from the radiation. Eventually, they couldn't keep going. Ignatenko and the others were helped down from the roof and rushed to the hospital. He was later transferred to Moscow, where doctors tried a bone marrow transplant, but it didn't work. His body just kept deteriorating. By May 13th, just a couple weeks after the disaster, Ignatenko passed away from the effects of radiation poisoning. It only makes sense to talk about Vasily's wife, Lyudmila Ignatenko, as well. She stayed by his side until his death, knowing full well that she could be exposed to harmful radiation too. After the explosion, Lyudmila traveled with Vasily's father to Moscow, where he was being treated for severe radiation poisoning. Even though his condition was rapidly worsening, she stayed at the hospital, caring for him as he deteriorated. Vasily's health declined quickly, and it was Lyudmila who called their family to Moscow when he was near death. On the night of April 26, 1986, Alexander Yevchenko was on a night shift at Chernobyl's reactor number 4, expecting a quiet shift after the reactor had been powered down for a safety test. But around 1:23 a.m., a massive explosion shook the plant. "The doors of my office were blown out," he said, describing this violent rush of dust and steam. In the chaos, debris fell around them as the lights went out. Alexander and a colleague ran to the transport corridor to find shelter, having no idea what had just happened. They thought maybe something heavy had fallen or even that war had broken out, but soon they realized that the reactor had exploded. After trying to call the control room with no luck, Alexander was ordered to bring stretchers. When he reached the control room, he met a colleague who was so severely burned he was almost totally unrecognizable. The man told him to go to the explosion site where others were injured, and it was completely horrific. The water coolant system was destroyed, pipes were hanging, and the reactor hull had been reduced to rubble. Alexander even said he saw a blue light rising from the reactor, a sign of deadly radiation. Knowing he could die from the radiation, he and others still tried to help. He saw workers sent to manually lower the control rods into the reactor, but they never made it back. He was left alone, barely surviving, with radiation sickness setting in. By 5 a.m., he was too weak to walk, and he was rushed to the hospital. Radiation left him with burns, constant transfusions, and long-term health problems, but miraculously, he did manage to survive. The Chernobyl liquidators were thousands of workers, including soldiers, firefighters, and engineers who were sent to contain the disaster. They worked under extreme conditions, cleaning up radioactive debris, building a concrete sarcophagus to encase the reactor, and helped in fighting fires. Unfortunately, a lot of them suffered from severe radiation sickness, cancers, and other long-term health issues, and those were just the ones who survived long enough. Unfortunately, their sacrifices were mostly ignored until much later, too. So, I'm going to show you a handful of surviving Chernobyl liquidators, along with quotes from them reflecting on the work they did in the aftermath of the disaster. disaster. This is Kozhevshna Ivanivna. I grew up in an orphanage. My fate was my own. If you are working somewhere, then you are responsible for that place of work. This is Yashin Mikhailovich, who said, nobody was obliged to work. I did my job. I wasn't forced to. After the accident, Pripyat was completely cut off from the country. You couldn't send a telegram or call anyone. Pictured here is Shirokov Alexei Vichlovich. No, I never regretted a thing. Nobody forced us to be there. I was invited to work, and the young lads, I tried to protect them. After a stroke, I can hardly remember my words. Viktor Brukinov was the manager in charge of constructing the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and served as its director until 1986. On the night of the disaster, he was called about an incident at the plant, but he didn't know that there was a test happening at the time. As he passed by reactor 4, he saw the damage and immediately ordered all authorities to meet at the nuclear bunker. Brukinov tried reaching the shift supervisor, but there was no response, so he activated the general radiation accident alarm, notifying the Ministry of Energy. Despite the obvious damage, Brukinov and his team were still trying to manage the situation, unaware that the reactor was already destroyed. Later, when Brukinov went to the courtyard and saw graphite pieces on the ground, he still couldn't believe that the reactor was gone. This did not fit in my head, he said. In the aftermath, he was questioned about the incident, stating, I am guilty. As a leader, I did not finish something. Somewhere I showed negligence, indiscretion. He was found guilty of gross safety violations and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He took some accountability, but also did insist that the accident was caused by flawed technology, not just human error. Anatoly Dyatlov was the deputy chief engineer at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and oversaw the operations of reactor 4. On the night of the disaster, Dyatlov was supervising the test that went horribly wrong. Before the test, he ordered the reactor power to be reduced to 200 megawatts, but when the reactor stalled, they couldn't raise it without risking a dangerous situation. But Dyatlov allowed the power to be increased, not fully understanding the risks. Unfortunately, this power increase led to the reactor's explosion, and even after the explosion, Dyatlov was in denial about how severe this really was. He continued ordering actions to restore control, like trying to manually insert control rods, but by then, it was just too late. When radiation sickness set in, he tried to report to his superiors, all while showing symptoms like vomiting from radiation exposure. He spent time in the hospital and suffered hair loss and burns from radiation, but he did survive. He was later blamed for the disaster in court, but he insisted that the reactor's design flaws, not operation error, were to blame. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He later wrote about the flaws in the reactor design, claiming that the accident was, quote, caused by completely inappropriate characteristics of the reactor. He died in 1995 from bone marrow cancer, most likely caused by radiation exposure. Alexander Akimov was the shift supervisor at Chernobyl's reactor 4 during the disaster. Again, when the reactor stalled and they tried to raise power again, it put the reactor in a dangerous state. Akimov ordered the emergency shutdown button to be pressed, but instead of stopping the reactor, it made the situation worse, causing the explosion. After the blast, Akimov and his team stayed in the reactor building trying to pump water into the core, and they continued working even when starting to show signs of radiation sickness. Akimov later said, "Believe what I was hearing about the reactor's damage. It just didn't seem possible." Akimov was exposed to a lethal dose of radiation and was sent to Moscow for treatment. But by the time investigators came to question him, he was too weak to speak. In the end, Akimov died from radiation sickness 2 weeks after the explosion, at just 33 years old. Evgeny Yashin was 40 years old when the Chernobyl disaster hit in April of 1986. He worked as a chemist at the plant, and on that fateful day, he was on a bus heading to work. Recalling the incident in an interview, he said, "Everyone was talking about the explosion of the reactor's emergency cooling system, but passing by the 4th power unit, it became clear to us that it was much more serious than expected. The wall of the reactor had completely fallen out, and a glow could be seen, resembling a steel foundry oven. We took action immediately." End quote. Yashin was in charge of a 300-person team at Chernobyl's chemical workshop, where their main job was to prepare demineralized water and process radioactive waste. We prepared the water to extinguish the reactor, walked knee-deep in water, and organized pumping. Water appeared to be flowing endlessly. The system was launched at full capacity, and more water was required. required, he said. On April 27th, Pripyat was evacuated, and Yashin remembers the buses going through the city to pick up residents and staff en route. By early May, staff began suffering serious side effects. Doctors were regularly monitoring their health, and some were even taken out of the zone to rest. Years later, Yashin still feels the effects on his health. For one, he has cancer, and he's gone on to say, "Very few of my colleagues are still alive. I am surprised that I, myself, am still alive." Another man I think is worth mentioning is Igor Kostin. Igor Kostin was one of only 5 photographers to capture images during the disaster. Working for the Novosti press agency in Kiev, he was sent to cover the immediate aftermath of the accident. You may have never heard his name, but you've probably seen his photos. Kostin's aerial images of the plant have become pretty iconic, and at the time, he was showing the true scale of the destruction when the Soviet government was trying to downplay how bad it really was. But Kostin didn't just photograph the immediate aftermath, he also documented the long-term effects, including deformities in animals born in the contaminated area. He made repeated trips into the exclusion zone to document the destruction caused by nuclear radiation. He passed away in 2015 at 78 years old.
Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have voles. Voles, those tiny furry rodents that look like they could be the star in a Disney movie, have a dark secret in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. They are the victims of their own diet. These creatures love mushrooms, and unfortunately, some mushroom species in the area are excellent at soaking up radiation like sponges. The result? Voles in radioactive hotspots show alarming trends. They're less fertile, their populations are dwindling, and their tiny eyes are developing cataracts at an unnaturally high rate. These symptoms highlight just how deeply radiation works its way through the food chain, showing no mercy even to the smallest forest residents. Next, we are talking about the mutated wolves. Wolves are not just surviving, they're actually thriving in Chernobyl's ghostly forests. Not only this, but they might actually be holding a secret that could help humanity. Studies by a Princeton University team revealed that these predators possess altered immune systems, potentially making them more resistant to cancer. Blood samples showed that their DNA has adapted in very unique ways, allowing them to tolerate the radiation-filled environment. Researchers believe these wolves could offer clues to combat cancer in humans. It's quite the twist of fate that the very landscape that should have destroyed them might have transformed them into something extraordinary. Next, we are talking about swallows. Barn swallows darting through the Chernobyl exclusion zone are more than just survivors of a nuclear disaster. They're carriers of a microscopic phenomenon that defies all logic. Nestled within their bodies are bacteria that have developed an extraordinary resistance to gamma radiation. These bacterial hitchhikers, exposed to generations of radioactive stress, have adapted in ways that turn one of nature's most destructive forces into a manageable environmental factor. Researchers have observed that these bacteria not only survive in high radiation conditions, but they actually thrive, suggesting that the disaster created an evolutionary pressure cooker that selected these near indestructible microbes. These microorganisms are effectively rewriting the rules of survival at the cellular level, raising questions about the adaptability of life in extreme conditions. Could this be a blueprint for how life might evolve in radioactive environments on other planets, or in the aftermath of nuclear catastrophes elsewhere? Next, we are talking about the lynx. The Eurasian lynx, long thought extinct in Europe, has staged a surprising return in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. With humans gone, these elusive cats have reclaimed their territory, thriving in the irradiated forests. While their radioactive exposure is unknown, scientists believe their radiation levels match other animals inside of the zone. Hundreds now roam the area, a long way from the extinction that people had thought. It is very clear that Chernobyl has shown us the unexpected consequences of a nuclear disaster, and how nature has bounced back in ways that no one even thought was possible. These predators have turned Chernobyl into their sanctuary, a radioactive kingdom where humanity no longer rules. In our number 6 spot today, we have the radioactive boars. The wild boars of Chernobyl are spreading. It sounds like a terrifying zombie movie, and honestly, it kind of is. These radioactive animals roam beyond the exclusion zone, mingling with non-radioactive boars, and then sometimes ending up as food for unsuspecting humans. In 2017, a third of wild boars tested in Germany showed radiation levels too dangerous for consumption thanks to their love of radioactive mushrooms. The boar's mobility ensures that Chernobyl's legacy continues to spread far beyond its borders, turning an ordinary forest hunt into a potential brush with disaster. At our number 5 spot and halfway mark, we have the eagles. The lynx isn't the only one making a huge comeback. The mighty white-tailed eagles, endangered across much of Europe, are making quite the appearance in Chernobyl. These birds, perched atop abandoned watchtowers, add to the ghostly atmosphere of the exclusion zone. While their populations are growing, which is great, they are not immune to radiation's effects. Researchers have found tumors, beak deformities, and lower fertility rates in some of the zone's 249 bird species. Yet, the eagles still continue to flourish, reclaiming a land stripped of human interference, but still full of invisible dangers. Next, we are talking about mutated spiders. Spiders are bad enough when they're normal. Mutated spiders are the stuff of nightmares. The spiders of Chernobyl's red forest are spinning webs that seem straight out of a horror movie. Their webs are oddly shaped, with chaotic patterns suggesting some very mysterious genetic mutations at play, and even more disturbing, these webs are radioactive themselves, laced with particles that have settled into the environment over decades. The spiders and their prey live and die in these toxic traps, creating a macabre cycle of contamination that illustrates how deeply radiation has seeped into even the tiniest details of life in the zone. In our number 3 spot today, we are talking about bison. The hulking bison of Chernobyl's exclusion zone, weighing up to a staggering 2,200 pounds, are living symbols of nature's resilience, but also its vulnerabilities. These majestic creatures graze on vegetation laced with radioactive particles absorbed from the soil. Every mouthful of grass or bark adds to their radiation load as isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 continue to circulate through the ecosystem decades after the disaster. Their sheer size and strength make them nearly invincible to predators, but radiation exposure has its own invisible consequences. Researchers have raised concerns about the long-term effects on their health and reproduction, including potential mutations, weakened immune systems, and shortened lifespans. Even more unsettling is the role these bison play in spreading the contamination. As they roam through the exclusion zone, their movements redistribute radioactive particles. Despite the risks, like many of the other animals, the bison have found a strange kind of sanctuary in this human-free wilderness. Their numbers are growing, and conservationists cautiously monitor their progress, marveling at how one of Europe's rarest animals has adapted to an environment hostile to most life forms. Next, we are talking about invertebrates. From one of the largest animals to some of the smallest, beneath the soil of Chernobyl's forests, the tiny creatures are waging a quiet battle for survival. Populations of bumblebees, butterflies, and grasshoppers have plummeted in areas with high radiation. The radioactive soil, saturated with cesium-137 and strontium-90, interferes with their ability to lay viable eggs, cutting off future generations. These losses ripple up the food chain, affecting everything from birds to small mammals. Invertebrates' decline is a reminder that radiation's most devastating impacts often begin with the smallest players in an ecosystem. And finally, to end off this list, in our number 1 spot, we are talking about fungi. For this one, we are heading right inside the heart of the reactor itself, the place where this all really started. Deep within the reactor's ruins, black fungi cling to life on the walls of the destroyed core itself. Species like Cryptococcus neoformans and Cladosporium don't just survive radiation, they actually use it as an energy source. Researchers have discovered that these fungi contain melanin, a pigment that absorbs ionizing radiation and turns it into chemical energy, much like plants use sunlight in photosynthesis. This ability, dubbed radiotropism, is as unsettling as it is fascinating, raising questions about what other life forms might adapt to survive in similarly extreme conditions.
To kick things off with a ghost story told by a nuclear physicist named Andrei Khrushchev after he visited Pripyat in 1997. He toured the number 4 reactor sarcophagus where the explosion had taken place. He was taking readings for radiation when he heard what sounded like screams coming from the inside, which was completely off limits due to the radiation. He described the experience saying, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years. And the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I wasn't looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and handprint, yet someone or something was inside. Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off." Next up is the Blackbird of Chernobyl. We've all heard of the Mothman before, who was spotted leading up to the collapsing of the Silver Bridge in West Virginia. Well, eerily, a very similar creature was said to be seen by several control room workers in the power plant just days before the explosion in 1986. A number of men reported seeing this massive, winged, shadowy creature with glowing red eyes flying over Chernobyl. After witnessing the creature, many of the men claimed to be plagued with horrible nightmares. Now, what makes this particular cryptid kind of frustrating is that there's not a lot of info on it. Unfortunately, most of the men who would have seen this thing died in the incident, so only vague stories have been passed on. It seems though that both the Mothman and the Blackbird showed up just before disaster struck as harbingers of doom, or perhaps they're moths drawn to a flame, the flame of imminent death and destruction. Next up on the list, we have the Red Forest. Now, the Red Forest is the most irradiated forested area surrounding Chernobyl. The trees have this reddish color after having absorbed high levels of ionizing radiation. The soil and water is heavily contaminated, but there are a lot of animals that actually call this place home. The boar population spiked as humans up and left. There are plenty of wolves and foxes, but they've evolved in weird ways. More on that later on. But for example, birds in the area actually have much smaller brains than other birds outside of the contaminated areas. We all love to imagine that toxic radiation result in like superpowers or something, but that is sadly not the case, at least not immediately. Eventually nature adapts, but it takes a bit of time. That's going to lead us to a pretty freaky experiment that went on in the Red Forest. So we've already discussed how heavily irradiated this part of the exclusion zone is. Well, this experiment from a few years back makes this abundantly clear. Scientists wanted to test how the radiation affected the insects, microbes, and fungi in the area that aid in decomposition. It seemed that the trees in the Red Forest that died right after the incident in 1986 weren't decaying properly. At the time these researchers were looking into it, it had been about 20 years since the incident, and fallen trees, which would typically be like sawdust and any other forest, were virtually unscathed. So the team of researchers, led by a biologist at the University of South Carolina, Columbia, named Timothy Massow, decided to do an experiment. They filled a bunch of mesh bags with leaves from a variety of trees in uncontaminated areas, then placed them throughout different areas of forest surrounding Chernobyl, some contaminated and some not. They returned after a year, they gathered up these bags, and they discovered that the leaves left in the most irradiated areas were virtually untouched, while leaves left in the uncontaminated areas were basically gone, having been recycled back into the soil by the healthy microbes and fungi. This means that these heavily irradiated areas aren't decaying and regrowing at a proper rate. It also means that there's a very high amount of leaf litter on the forest floor that could lead to forest fires, potentially spreading radiation outside of the exclusion zone. Next up, we have a Reddit post written by someone who decided to venture into the exclusion zone and had an eerie encounter with a set of dolls. They wrote the following: "A buddy and I decided to venture into the heart of Pripyat. Always had a weird fascination with it and just wanted to say I'd done it, you know? Just explore what is basically a post-apocalyptic landscape. First, it was pretty much what we expected. Crumbling buildings, overgrown playgrounds, and the unsettling silence that comes with any big deserted place. But the hospital had to be the most bone-chilling part of the whole trip. Old medical equipment, dusty beds. We even saw a couple dolls scattered around. Now, I've seen my fair share of creepy dolls in horror movies, even supposedly haunted ones in antique stores and stuff like that, but this was different, and it didn't end there. At one point, I swear we heard faint whispers coming from down the hallway. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but the whispers started to get more distinct. Buddy joked that the dolls were trying to speak to us, and that's when I got this uncanny feeling. Not saying that was exactly what was going on, but I don't know, something just told me it was time to leave. But as we left the room, the whispers seemed to follow us. We couldn't shake the feeling that those dolls were watching us, their lifeless eyes piercing through us. We'd also taken Geiger counters with us, which started acting up. We couldn't find a logical explanation for the sudden spike in radiation. It felt like the city itself was alive, reacting to our presence. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about that room and those dolls left us with such an uneasy feeling. Alright, we've all heard about the mutated animals in Pripyat, so let's talk about some specific ones, like the dogs. A recent study was done to see if there were differences between the wild dogs living close to the Chernobyl power plant and dogs living outside of the exclusion zone. Scientists from the University of South Carolina and the National Human Genome Research Institute decided to study 302 of these wild dogs, and the research is still in its early stages, but it seems as if these dogs may be thriving in the harsh environment. After the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, everyone was evacuated, but many pets, including of course dogs, were left behind. There are now thousands of feral dogs living in the surrounding area, so they've been able to reproduce, unlike some animals in the area who seem to have been hindered when it comes to reproduction, like bees, for example. It could be that these feral dogs have built up resistances to the radiation, growing to be more immune to cancer, for example, which would be pretty incredible. But it's not only dogs that have evolved in weird ways since the disaster in '86. Frogs in the exclusion zone have also changed because of the high amounts of radiation. Back in 2016, Pablo Barraco and German Orizuela, two Spanish researchers who were looking into the environmental changes in Pripyat, made an odd discovery: black frogs. Now, a black frog on its own isn't all that strange. There are plenty of frogs that are dark in color, but the Hyla orientalis tree frog, typically found in the area, is a bright shade of green, or at least they were before the radiation in the area seemed to change them. So why are the frogs in this radiated zone darker in color? Well, they've grown to adapt. These frogs have more melanin, which means they're less likely to suffer cell damage from radiation exposure. Pretty amazing, like how quickly nature is able to grow and adapt even in the harshest conditions. Eventually, it just overcomes. Next up, we have another Reddit post I'm going to call Laughter in the Night. It was written by a now deleted user. Hey, fellow urban explorers, I've been meaning to share this experience from my recent trip to Chernobyl. So me and a couple friends decided to venture into the heart of the exclusion zone. We had explored Pripyat during the day, but thought a night trek would be a little more thrilling. We found ourselves near the infamous Ferris wheel. This is creepy enough as it is at night, but my god, I will never forget this one moment for as long as I live. Me and my friends are just bumming around the Ferris wheel. I wasn't paying much attention to what they were talking about, kind of zoning out. I suddenly heard a faint, distant laughter, like children were playing just off in the distance. And it wasn't just me that heard it, everyone went quiet immediately. One of my buddies had the bright idea of following the laughter. I was pretty reluctant, but ultimately we all agreed to have a look. We followed the sound, and as we got closer, it dawned on us, and I knew not, we ended up at a school. The laughter had been coming from inside. Then as abruptly as it began, the laughter stopped. We noped out of there screaming. To this day, we can't explain what we heard. Would you have gone and followed the laughter? I don't know. I feel like I'd like to. Like, that sounds interesting. But I don't know. In the moment, I might have just left. I don't know. What do you guys think, though? Let us know in the comments. All right, let's talk about the reported UFO sightings in the days leading up to the Chernobyl disaster. Turns out, it wasn't just the ominous blackbird of Chernobyl that was seen just before Reactor 4 exploded, but unidentified flying objects as well. So what could this mean? Well, your gut instinct might be that if these unidentified objects were indeed alien crafts, that maybe they played a part in setting off the disaster, that they wanted to cause humanity harm for whatever reason. But that's not the popular theory. Might make you feel a lot better to think of it in a different way, that these supposed aliens weren't out to cause us harm, but to actually help mitigate the disaster in some way. There's a theory that these aliens may have reduced the severity of the radiation and that something that could have been far worse was contained to one area. What's interesting is that this isn't the only time UFOs have been spotted around nuclear disasters. A series of UFOs were spotted in the days following the Fukushima nuclear disaster as well. So I don't know, this is pretty interesting. There could be something to this. Finally though, we have phantom radio signals. This refers to mysterious and unexplained radio transmissions that have been reported by urban explorers within the exclusion zone. These signals often appear on frequencies that should be silent or unused. Explorers equipped with radios have described hearing distorted voices and odd sounds that don't sound like typical radio noise, and some have even claimed to hear vague messages coming through these signals. A possible scientific explanation could be electromagnetic effects lingering from the nuclear disaster, but if you believe in the more paranormal side of things, it's said that these signals may be coming from entities who died in the disaster attempting to make contact through the radio.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the reactor visit. This is a story that was told by a nuclear physicist from New York, Andrei Karsukov, and he told this story after he visited Chernobyl in 1997. During this visit, he went to the power station around 7:30 a.m. and he went into what was left of reactor number 4. This is where the explosion occurred. He began to take some radiation level readings, but suddenly he began to hear someone scream. He said, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years, and the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and a handprint, yet someone or something was inside." Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off. Maybe the reactor itself is now haunted by the souls who lost their lives as a result of the meltdown. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not visiting the site. But with the technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone, searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds. But with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sightings of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. People have reported seeing shadowy figures, sometimes even faces in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things on today's list? In our number 8 spot today, we have the Blackbird. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the Blackbird for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The Blackbird is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plant on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from, unfortunately, were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from the radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the Blackbird really is out there or not. The Blackbird is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. I don't know, okay? It's for your health. In our number 7 spot today, we have the government cover-up. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around it, and this little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in shortwave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and they would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what it was. This strange noise actually would go on to gain the tower the nickname Woodpecker for an idea of what the sound sounded like. Because of the fact that people didn't know where the sound was coming from, it led them to think that this signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So the story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but there are definitely people out there who believe it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the spiders. The spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are, of course, radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, it's also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are literally making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they once were, which would suggest, of course, some sort of genetic mutation is at play. Spiders were already a creature I'd like to stay far away from. I feel just like tingly talking about them, but radioactive spiders adds a whole new level. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for regular old radioactive material, but now also get the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. That's amazing. It's so great. In our number 5 spot today, we have the alien invasion. Okay, it seems absolutely insane, but there is an alien conspiracy that actually revolves around Chernobyl, and there are people who believe it's true. There is part of this theory that I like, and that is because it basically suggests that aliens saved humanity. Yeah, in this story, they didn't cause disaster or try to steal our planet, and instead, they saved us from a complete and total meltdown. What happened, and how this all started, is that around the same time of the Chernobyl disaster, people reported spotting a number of UFOs. One witness even said that they saw a UFO for 6 hours. So basically, because of this uptick in sightings, people believe that the aliens came to help sort of diffuse some of the radiation levels that were seen after the disaster. This would have helped to prevent an even larger blast with an even higher amount of death and illness. This is sort of a conspiracy brought up to explain how, while this meltdown was of course catastrophic, it didn't leave like apocalyptic level damage, which believers of this theory said there should have been. So what do we think? Did aliens come to save the planet? In our number 4 spot today, we have The Musician. This is a story that comes from a Redditor named Jake, but this actually isn't Jake's story. This is the story of a man named Eerie who Jake met at a bar in Finland. Eerie is actually a Chernobyl survivor, and he had quite the harrowing tale to share with Jake. Eerie is a musician, and at the time of the disaster, he was in a state-sponsored musical dance troupe. Basically, as soon as the disaster happened, this group was called upon by the government to come in and calm the people living in the area. Eerie said, quote, "Mere hours after the meltdown commenced, our bus entered the exclusion zone at checkpoint Dityatki. We were told not anything, and the soldiers made it forbidden for speaking with the village people. Imagine not knowing a disaster taking place, yet seeing the strange workings of the radioactivity all around. Everyone was sick and dying, yet quarantined and not allowed to leave the zone." This is all chilling, but this is where the story takes a terrifying turn. He begins to describe their final performance, which was in Pripyat. The ballerina danced, knowing something horrible had happened, and she danced like never before, and she even let her hair down from her bun to just let it flow. Suddenly though, Eerie noticed that these locks of hair weren't just falling out of her bun, they were falling down. to the ground. Basically, Eerie ends off his story by explaining his escape, which was through back roads and avoiding military checkpoints, and he ends off by saying that he is the only one of his group to survive. In our number 3 spot today, we have barn swallows. Any animal who lives in the exclusion zone has to have been affected by the disaster, and that includes those who spend most of their time in the sky. I'm obviously talking about birds. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all of the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what they are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have had much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course, they continue to adapt as time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and their resilience. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chernobyl zombies. This little legend that comes from within the exclusion zone claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happened if those who did then became the undead? We're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of the toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm nor deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this one most likely fake. I mean, at least I am really hoping it is. We're dealing with enough as a society. We don't need zombies on the list. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it certainly is not based on any real life facts, at least that we know of. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. Speaking of that video game, which is called Stalker, it might have inspired the tales of the zombies, but it also apparently has inspired some to try and sneak into the exclusion zone themselves. This popular game set in the zone has made some people try and sneak into it themselves in real life in order to live out the game. You know, like a LARPing scenario, but the only enemy this time is radiation. Basically, there are these people who are now being referred to as stalkers, and they are said to be sort of romanticizing the exclusion zone. They like to sneak in, explore the ruins, sleep in the abandoned buildings, and sometimes even bring in a device to show them how much radiation they're being exposed to, which is pretty frightening. Despite these dangerous explorers sharing their nickname with the video game, however, the name actually comes from characters in the novel Roadside Picnic, which was turned into a classic Soviet film entitled Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. The term stalker is meant to refer to thieves who sneak into places that are harboring lethal secrets. Some even tried to tempt fate even more by doing things like eating fruit that they found growing in the zone. Because of the fact that this place is meant to be off limits, many of those sneaking in here who consider themselves stalkers wear things like paramilitary gear, they wear gas masks, balaclavas, and other things to cover their face. All in all, it's very dangerous and also very unsettling. The Chernobyl exclusion zone has witnessed several forest fires over the years, which have raised significant environmental and health concerns. These fires are particularly problematic because they can remobilize radioactive elements like cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium, which were deposited in the area following the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. When the vegetation in the exclusion zone contaminated by these radioactive particles burns, the smoke and ash can carry these particles over long distances, potentially spreading radiation beyond the immediate area of the fire. This phenomenon poses a considerable challenge for both environmental management and for public health. From an ecological standpoint, the redistribution of radioactive materials can affect a wide range of organisms, altering the mutation rates and impacting the health and stability of ecosystems in and around the exclusion zone. For human populations, especially those living in proximity to the exclusion zone, there is a risk of exposure to radioactive particles carried by smoke, which can have long-term health implications. The management of these fires, therefore, is not just a matter of controlling the blaze, but also involves monitoring and mitigating the spread of radioactivity, making it a very complex complex task for both firefighters and radiation safety experts. Next up, we have the new nuclear reactions. It's what nobody wants to hear in relation to Chernobyl. New nuclear reactions. Can't be good. The recent detection of increasing fission reactions in an inaccessible chamber of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant has raised significant concerns among scientists and safety experts. This chamber, which has remained sealed and unobserved by human or robotic means since the 1986 disaster, has shown a worrying surge in neutron emissions, a clear indicator of escalating nuclear fission activity. The primary concern for researchers is to figure out whether this escalation in nuclear activity will naturally diminish, or it will require a complex and hazardous intervention to avert a potential secondary nuclear incident. The situation is kind of similar to smoldering embers in a barbecue pit, a metaphor illustrating that while it doesn't pose an immediate explosive threat, it is an active problem that definitely requires ongoing supervision. The implications of this development are terrifying, as it highlights the long-term complexities and unpredictable nature of nuclear disaster aftermaths. This just goes to show how the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster continues to teach us and captivate us even decades later. Speaking of how Chernobyl continues to teach us more about the effects of nuclear disaster and radioactivity, next up on our list we have the radiation research. Ongoing research in the Chernobyl exclusion zone has significantly advanced our understanding of radiation's long-term ecological and biological impacts. Scientists have been studying the mutation rates in various species of flora and fauna within the zone, providing data on how radiation affects living organisms at the genetic level. These mutations, ranging from subtle genetic changes to visible deformities, offers insight into the mechanisms of radiation-induced damage. Researchers are also exploring how these genetic changes might affect population dynamics, species interactions, and overall ecosystem health. The area has become a unique natural laboratory for studying the ecological impacts of radiation, allowing scientists to observe the recovery processes in ecosystems subjected to high radiation levels. This research not only sheds light on the resilience and adaptability of nature, but also informs future strategies for managing contaminated environments and assessing the environmental risks associated with nuclear accidents. Next up, we have the very unfortunate psychological impacts of the disaster. Psychology issues resulting from widespread fear of radiological disease is a much greater issue, impacting many more people with lethal health effects. People who believe they or others have been impacted by radiological illnesses, erroneous or otherwise, exhibit greater issues with feelings of no control or fatalistic and pessimistic outlooks. This often leads to harmful behaviors, such as a lack of initiative to treat diseases. These fears are further strengthened by poor public understanding of the effects of radiation. Because of the radiation in Chernobyl, the people living there had to move, and it's been studied that these groups of people believed they had an illness related to radiation exposure more often than the citizens who actually remained inside of the contaminated regions. This brings into question the effectiveness of resettlement. Also, psychological distresses can significantly increase cancer mortality rates, possibly as much as 97%, nearly double, resulting in as many as approximately 100,000 additional cancer mortalities. From this accident, the fear of radiological illness has been way more prominent. Around our halfway mark today, we have the decaying of nature. Since the Chernobyl disaster, scientists have realized something very strange with the plants in the exclusion zone. They have realized that the dead trees, plants, and leaves at the contaminated site don't decay at nearly the same rate as plants elsewhere. This is definitely weird. I mean, just thinking about it, I would have thought that the opposite would be true, that plants in the exclusion zone would decay even faster. But this is why it's good that I am not a scientist. Tim Mosow, a professor of biology at the University of South Carolina, has said, quote, "We were stepping over all these dead trees on the ground that had been killed by the initial blast. Years later, these tree trunks were in pretty good shape. If a tree had fallen in my backyard, it would be sawdust in 10 years or so." To find out what was happening, or more accurately, what wasn't happening, the research team collected hundreds of samples of leaf litter from forest floors that were not contaminated by radiation and stuffed the leaves into bags lined with pantyhose. This was to keep out insects. They then distributed these bags around the Chernobyl area and waited 9 months. The results were shocking. Samples of leaf litter that were placed in highly contaminated areas showed 40% less decomposition than samples that were placed in uncontaminated sites. The degree of decay was proportional to the degree of radioactive contamination at each site, according to the study. Now that really is just interesting. Next up on our list, we have the Sweden effect. I'm sure you might be wondering what Sweden could possibly have to do with Chernobyl, but don't fret, I'm here to tell you. The radioactive cloud from Chernobyl rode the wind over to Sweden and spit out in the form of rain. As teardrops? Somebody's really crying. As raindrops landed, so did radiation, especially in parts of north and central Sweden. Keeping food from getting contaminated was an issue in some places. Northern Sweden absorbed a whole 5% of the radioactive cesium-137 that Chernobyl released into the air. Atoms of it wound up in the lichen that reindeer graze on. That same year, after the farmers' meat harvesting season, it was discovered that almost 80% of the Swedish reindeer meat was too contaminated for sale. 80%! That's so much! Reindeer farmers had to change their practices, harvesting their meat earlier in the year before the animals had a chance to eat the contaminated moss. Because of this contamination, the Swedish authorities actually ended up raising the limit for permissible radiation in game, freshwater fish, wild berries, and mushrooms, based on their view that these foods made up only a little bit of the Swedish diet. Even to this day, a small portion of reindeer can't be sold because they have too much of the radioactive element. Moving on down our list, we have the new safe confinement, also known as the NSC. This structure at Chernobyl represents a monumental advancement in nuclear containment technology. This massive structure, completed and put into place in 2016, was designed to address the critical need to secure the remains of the reactor that was destroyed in the 1986 disaster. The NSC is a feat of engineering, designed to last at least 100 years and to withstand extreme weather conditions. Its primary purpose is to prevent the escape of radioactive material from the original sarcophagus, which was hastily constructed following the accident and had since deteriorated. Additionally, the NSC provides a controlled environment for the deconstruction of the reactor and the management of radioactive waste, effectively reducing the risk of further radiation leakage into the environment, which I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief for. This structure is not only a shield against the radiation, but also serves as a symbol of international cooperation, as its construction involved experts and funding from around the world. The NSC's completion marked a significant step forward in the long-term effort to contain the Chernobyl disaster's legacy and mitigate its environmental impact. Moving on our list, we have the mysterious fungi. Fungi is definitely one of the weirdest things we have on our planet. Not sure if you guys have seen that documentary, Fantastic Fungi, but that thing absolutely blew my mind. It's kind of creepy, but also truly incredible. This isn't just a love letter to mushrooms. I do have a point I'm trying to make here, and that point would be the discovery of radiotrophic fungi in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which presents a remarkable example of life's adaptability to extreme environments. These fungi have developed a unique mechanism to harness radiation for growth. They utilize melanin, a pigment found in their cell walls, to convert gamma radiation into chemical energy. This process is somewhat similar similar to photosynthesis, where plants use chlorophyll to convert sunlight into energy. We all struggled to say that word in elementary school when we learned about it, but in this case, instead of sunlight, the fungi are using radiation as their energy source. This discovery opens new avenues for research in the fields of biology, ecology, and biotechnology. From a biological standpoint, it provides insights into how organisms adapt to and thrive in hostile environments, which could be crucial for understanding life in extreme conditions on Earth, and potentially other planets too. In terms of practical applications, these radiotrophic fungi could be used in bioremediation to clean up radioactive waste or environments contaminated by nuclear accidents. The fungi are fantastic, what can I say? Next up on our list we have the government cover-up theory. What's a good list without a little government conspiracy, you know what I mean? After the release of the incredible HBO show Chernobyl, which if you haven't seen it, it is a must watch. I'm looking at you, Taylor. Truly such a good show, very unsettling. After the show's release, the Russian government released a statement saying that the show was actually anti-Soviet Union propaganda and that they would be releasing their own Chernobyl show, which would detail how the CIA was actually the cause for the original nuclear disaster. Rumor has it that the CIA sabotaged something which caused the reactor to melt down, and the whole thing was actually America's fault. I have no way of either proving or disproving this theory or legend, but I think it's probably safe to say that someone here isn't telling the truth. I'll let you decide for yourself. And finally, rounding out our list today, we have the alien cleanup. Okay, just one more bizarre theory. There's always gotta be an alien story to keep things interesting and to add to the list of questions we have for extraterrestrials when we hopefully eventually find them. Rather than the aliens causing the disaster, which might be where your mind went, instead this legend suggests that they helped in the aftermath. Apparently, some people out there think that the Chernobyl disaster wasn't as bad as it should have been. I don't think they mean it in as bad of a way as that sounds, but rather that they are surprised that the amount of people who passed in the disaster wasn't higher considering how bad the whole ordeal actually was. This, coupled with an apparent eyewitness account from a man named Mikhail Veritsky, who claimed he saw a fiery ball of light hovering for a few minutes above the exposed reactor on the night of the incident, has led people to speculate that maybe our friendly alien neighbors swooped down in the nick of time to help clean up the mess that was made. Apparently, this ball of light was also seen on September 16th, 1989, when there was more radiation leaking from the unit at Chernobyl, which some claim was the aliens containing the radiation. Honestly, I'd like to think that this one is true, because what a nice thing for the aliens to do. They probably have their own nuclear weapons, so they certainly didn't need ours, and we really did not have the tools to clean it up, so I can definitely appreciate the fact that they were willing to lend a helping hand. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the disaster. We talk a lot about Chernobyl, but how often do we really discuss how this disaster actually happened in the first place? What actually went on that caused it? The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred on April 26, 1986 in Ukraine, which at the time was a part of the Soviet Union. During a routine safety test, a series of errors and design flaws led to an explosion in reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The explosion caused a massive fire that released radioactive material into the atmosphere, which was carried by wind across Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of Europe. The disaster was caused by a combination of factors, including a flawed reactor design, a lack of safety, and human error. During the safety test, the reactor's power output dropped to dangerously low levels, leading to an attempt to restore power that resulted in a sudden surge. This caused the reactor to overheat, leading to a steam explosion that destroyed the reactor's upper structure. The accident caused immediate deaths due to the explosion, as well as long-term health effects from exposure to radiation. The Chernobyl disaster remains the worst nuclear accident in history in terms of the number of deaths and the environmental impact. It led to significant changes in nuclear safety regulations and increased awareness of the potential risks of nuclear power. In our number 9 spot today we have the operator. This story is one that comes directly from Alexei Brius, who is a control room room operator at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this is his story of the day of the disaster, which starts as he was traveling on a bus to work on April 26, 1986, knowing nothing of the historic disaster that occurred just hours before. As he arrived, he thought, quote, "It looked like it would be a mass grave. I was sure that the whole night shift had died there." He continued on to say, quote, "At the moment of the explosion, I was in Pripyat in my flat. I was sleeping tightly. I didn't hear, I didn't see anything. In the morning, I was to go to work, and so I did. I knew nothing about the disaster. I just got on a bus and went to work. As I was coming close to the station, I saw from the bus that the block was destroyed. I always say that my hair stood on its end when I saw that. I didn't understand why me and other workers were brought there, but it turned out that there was still much work to be done. Me and my coworkers got off the bus and tried to enter the territory of the 4th block as we were supposed to. There was a guard wearing a rubber-coated army suit who had orders not to let anyone in. Finally, they agreed. The guarding sergeant gave us each a pill of potassium iodide. I took it immediately. It was a special medicine made to protect the thyroid gland from radiation. All my life, I remember him with gratitude. The upper part of the reactor and the separator barrel were open. The main circulating pump was seen from the outside. Down the reactor, I saw the reactor's emergency cooling system all ruined. Its pieces were mixed with slabs of concrete. I was stepping over lumps of black graphite. I didn't want to admit what I saw, just like many other people, that it was black graphite. Alexei goes on to explain that he and the other operators had to, quote, "save those injured by fire, debris, hot water, and steam and radiation. We were to find them, carry them out, and deliver them to the medical personnel and go look for others. We saved and brought everybody out except for one person. He is still somewhere there inside the reactor." In our number 8 spot today, a bit of a bit of a break in the really dark story, we have cows. Alright, cows can cheer anybody up. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. While many people who were forced to evacuate had to leave their animals behind, since farm animals are not only expensive but can also be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them. Unfortunately, however, many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led to completely normal-looking cows near the exclusion zone to begin producing milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. While some of the outside and more visible effects of the radiation has worn off, there are still many unseen effects that continue to be prevalent today. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Liquidators. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Soviet authorities sent in robots to help with the cleanup efforts in the most hazardous areas. This was an amazing idea until the robots quickly became damaged or destroyed by the high levels of radiation in the environment. The robots faced several challenges, including damage to their electronic components and problems with their movement systems. The high levels of radiation also made it difficult for the robots to function, as the radiation would interfere with the robots' sensors and their controls. Of course, with robots out of the picture, humans were the ones who continued with the cleanup efforts. Known as liquidators, these people were primarily Soviet military personnel, firefighters, and volunteers who were tasked with containing the radioactive material and preventing further contamination, and they faced extreme danger and were exposed to high levels of radiation. Many of these people were working without proper protective gear and in close proximity to the highly radioactive material. Despite these dangers, the liquidators worked tirelessly to contain the disaster and prevent further harm. Many of the liquidators suffered from acute radiation sickness, with symptoms including nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Long-term health effects including cancer and other illnesses have also been reported among the liquidators. The liquidators played a very vital role in preventing further harm from the Chernobyl disaster, and they are often referred to as heroes for their bravery and their sacrifice. Many have received recognition and awards for their efforts, but many continue to suffer from the long-term health effects of their exposure to the radiation. In our number 6 spot today, we have the abandoned amusement park. The Pripyat amusement park, located in the town of Pripyat in Ukraine, was set to open on May 1st, 1986, just days after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The park was intended to be a celebration of the town's prosperity and the Soviet Union's technological achievements, but it never opened its doors to the public due to the disaster. The park features a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, a carousel, and other rides which still stand today as an eerie reminder of the town's abandoned past. The Ferris wheel is particularly haunting, with rusted and decaying carts. The amusement park was never fully completed and its rides were never tested or operated, and today it serves as a chilling symbol of the devastating impact of the Chernobyl disaster on the town and its people. Despite the danger posed by the high levels of radiation in the area, the Pripyat amusement park has become a popular destination for tourists seeking to witness the haunting beauty of the abandoned rides and the town itself. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Pilot. This is another first-hand account from right after the disaster, and this one comes from Igor Pismensky, who was a helicopter navigator following the disaster. After the meltdown, helicopter crews were sent out to try and spread decontamination materials over the site. One of these crews was actually killed trying to do this work after they crashed at the site. Of the disaster, Igor said, quote, "They told us there had been an explosion at the plant, so they needed our help. The mission was, after the firemen, to drop down loads of stuff from helicopters to the destroyed reactor. First sand, then lead, dolomite, boron. We would load up about 15 kilometers distance from the reactor. They would put sandbags into parachutes, then we would take off and pass around in a conveyor fashion. There would be a circle of up to 40 helicopters in the air, which would fly over and right above the reactor every 2 to 3 minutes. No one opened the windows. The chopper was all shut, but it was not airtight. It was not protected against radiation. The view of the destroyed reactor down below, after the main fire had been put out, you could see separate glowing reddish fire beds in the first days. This was the view from the height of 200 meters. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, but what we did not have was adequate protective gear for the mission, but that's the responsibility of those who sent us there. Radiation is considered invisible. It cannot be seen, but you can feel it. That is, you can feel a certain metallic taste in your mouth and a sore throat. Radiation never passes without a trace, so the consequences are always there, and radiation usually hits precisely those parts of the body that are the most vulnerable. So for everyone who's gone through Chernobyl, there are consequences. I remember so well the first time we flew over Pripyat town. The whole town had been evacuated by then, but everything looked sort of surreal. Linen is hanging on laundry lines, on balconies, you see dropped bicycles, abandoned cars, no life around, all people gone, but their stuff is still there. When the catastrophe happened, there was the Soviet Union. We had 15 constituent republics playing their part in handling this mess. Today, no country in the world would be in a position to handle the problem of this magnitude if it happened again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a highly radioactive mass of corium that was formed during the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. It is named after its shape, which resembles that of an elephant's foot. The corium was formed when the reactor's core melted down, causing a mixture of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials to form into a highly radioactive mass. The elephant's foot is estimated to have had a temperature of around 2,700 degrees Celsius at the time of the accident and emitted lethal levels of radiation. The initial workers who tried to remove the elephant's foot from the reactor died within weeks due to the radiation exposure. Today, the elephant's foot remains extremely radioactive and is still inaccessible. It is estimated to be one of the most dangerous objects in the world, with exposure to it resulting in almost certain death within minutes. In our number 3 spot today, we have Kopachi. Kopachi was a village in Ukraine that was affected by the disaster. The village was situated close to the nuclear power plant, and its residents were exposed to high levels of radiation. To contain the spread of contamination, the Soviet government ordered the evacuation and burial of the village, including burying the contaminated soil under a layer of clean soil. Today, Kopachi remains abandoned and designated as a part of the exclusion zone around the Chernobyl plant. The village and surrounding area serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear disasters and the importance of nuclear safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the plant. It might come as a surprise, but the Chernobyl nuclear plant didn't just shut down entirely after the disaster. Despite the contamination and the risks associated, they continued to use the plant for years to come. Reactor 4, which exploded during the accident, was completely destroyed, and the other reactors were shut down over time. The Soviet government continued to use parts of the plant for several years to generate electricity and heat for the surrounding area, but eventually the plant was decommissioned. It wasn't until December of 2000 that the final reactor, Reactor 3, was shut down. Reactor 2 was shut down in 1991, and 1 was shut down in 1996. It is thought that the plant should be fully out of use by 2028. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Containment. After the disaster took place, the damaged reactor number 4, was sealed in a heavy concrete sarcophagus that was meant to keep the radiation concealed and contained. While this may seem like a foolproof plan, there are many debates about how effective this containment actually is, and how effective it may or may not continue to be. These are, of course, super important questions, and considering the fact that it's something we've never really had to deal with before in any way, how are we really supposed to know until we try? The building of a new structure called the New Safe Confinement Structure started in 2006, and it was completed in 2017. The new structure is 843 feet wide, 531 feet long, and 356 feet tall, and is meant to keep the reactor and its previous sarcophagus contained for at least the next 100 years.
Starting us off at number 10 are Dewey's old favorite, dolls. Remember this one? Yeah, so in case you missed a few of our other Chernobyl videos, there are large piles of creepy, most likely possessed, burned up, radioactive dolls everywhere. Where are they coming from? Well, odds are most of these are actually coming from tourists and people looking to grab that one spooky and scary pic for the gram, but no one knows how this all came to be. It's hard to know if this started from actual dolls that witnessed the explosion, or if someone just had the bright idea one day to start adding messed up dolls all over the exclusion zone. In the end, we will never know, because unless you are a regular there at the exclusion zone, it's hard to distinguish which dolls have been there since day one and which ones are new additions. Either way, I hate all of it. At number 9, we have missing silver filters. Remember those pile of creepy dolls? Yeah, of course you do, it literally just freaking happened. Well, in addition to the piles of dead dolls, there are also piles of old gas masks everywhere, especially in one old school classroom. Some cheeky and hilarious, sick person even put some of these masks on dolls. Isn't that great? Anyway, what is mysterious about these gas masks is that these filters inside of all of them have been removed, and these filters contain just a small amount of silver in them, and what is most likely what happened is that looters came and took all of them. But what was done with the silver? No one really knows. If looters did indeed steal them, then I'm guessing that somewhere out there some people have radioactive jewelry or even silverware, because they most likely sold it. It's hard to say, but if any of you watching have your own Geiger meters at home right now, I would check it out on anything silver in your home, because you might just have a Chernobyl souvenir without even knowing it. At number 8, we have survivor immortality. While this one doesn't take place in Chernobyl exactly, it stems from Chernobyl. One Russian scientist who survived the explosion back in 1986 and 6 other Russian scientists have recently relocated to the small Greek island of Gavdos. There is some conspiracy though, because some believe that these scientists actually relocated to the island to become immortal. Gavdos has 50 residents in total on the island, and it is believed to have mythical healing powers that make its residents immortal. Reporters from Vice interviewed a filmmaker who was making a documentary on the island and found out that the scientists work on various inventions from inside the local compound. They also have 7 acres of land that was given to them by a priest. Some think these Russian scientists are spies, while others believe they moved out there to not only become immortal themselves, but also clear them of all the radiation using the mystical powers of the island. They are apparently also building a temple named the Temple of Apollo. I think these guys were a little too close to the blast, if you know what I mean. At number 7, we have the random examination chair. Out in the middle of a wooded area in the exclusion zone is a random gynecologist's chair. How the hell did it get there? No one freaking knows. It can only be assumed that this chair was picked up by some local pranksters who went through the trouble of picking up this radioactive artifact and brought it to a random spot in the woods. But that is so much freaking work. I mean, guys, why? Aside from that, every other possibility is straight up terrifying. Maybe the blast blasted the chair out in the forest, but if it did, then why was there one of these chairs so close to a freaking radioactive reactor? See, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's just another unproven, less than appealing sight that can be found in the exclusion zone. At number 6, we have silhouettes. You may remember this one from one of my other Chernobyl videos too. The mystery here is we have no idea if these silhouettes are actually based on real people or if it's just a morbid art piece done by another Chernobyl creepy artist. New silhouettes show up all of the time, all over the town of Pripyat, and the only other mystery here is who is behind it. Is it one talented artist, or is it a group that has decided to take turns so no one ever gets the true answer? No matter what, these things sure do add to the creep factor of this ghost town, and I'm sure it's also a terrifying sight to see at night. Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have a Chernobyl cover-up. In a documentary titled The Russian Woodpecker, Fyodor Alexandrovich explains a conspiracy theory that the Chernobyl blast was actually orchestrated to cover up the failure of the Russian woodpecker. Now, it wasn't a Russian bird or the Russian version of Woody the Woodpecker. The Russian woodpecker was actually an array radar that was meant to detect missiles before they were launched. The device was named after its woodpecker-like sound it would make during its operation. It cost 7 billion rubles and unfortunately did not work. It is suspected that it didn't work because of the northern lights messing with its signals, but it can't be for certain. So instead of suffering this terrible embarrassment, the Chernobyl plant that was known for its instability blew up, distracting everyone from the failure of the woodpecker. It's hard to say how likely all of this is, but when shooting the woodpecker documentary, apparently some pretty weird stuff happened to the documentary crew, such as visits from secret police services, as well as even one crew member being shot by a hidden sniper during the Euromaidan protests. Whatever the truth is here, it sounds like they were putting their nose where it wasn't wanted. At number 4, we have no containment building. Back in 1986, when the Chernobyl explosion actually happened, there was quite mysteriously no containment building that surrounded the reactors. Usually there are containment structures around radioactive places like the reactors located in Chernobyl. They are gas-tight structures that are usually made of steel reinforced concrete, so it can confine fission products that could release into the atmosphere during an accident if one were to happen. Sure enough, we all know that one happened here, and interestingly enough, it was not prepared for an accident that dangerous. According to author Richard Mueller of the book Physics for Future Presidents: The Science Behind the Headlines, if there would have been a containment unit around the reactors, Mueller believes that there would have been virtually no deaths. Interesting. I wonder if this coincides with any of the conspiracy of the Russian woodpecker as mentioned before. Maybe. Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have alien saviors. In this case they quite literally came in peace. An eyewitness by the name of Mikhail Varitsky claimed to have seen a large fireball of light hovering above the reactor on the night of the explosion. Later on September 16th in 1989, apparently there was another huge radiation leak, and it is reported that this same ball of light was seen in the exact same spot once again. Many believe it to be aliens that were actually protecting us from the radioactive blast. Some claim that the blast was nowhere near as big as what it could have been, and that these aliens actually helped absorb and clean up whatever extra radiation that they could to save us. You know me, I'm all about the alien theories, but I'm not sure about this one. I will say, many say similar events happened during the Fukushima accident as well. Oh well, aliens, if you are listening to me right now and you did help us, thank you. Now, show yourself. At number 2, we had the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In April of 1986, right before the explosion in July, many reported seeing a large creature that looked like a blackbird flying around Chernobyl. This creature was large with red glowing eyes and was compared to America's legend, the Mothman. Why? What's so similar between a large Mothman and a large blackbird? Well, both of these creatures had large glowing red eyes, as well as both showed up right before major events. The Mothman appeared and was spotted right before the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967, which reportedly killed 46 people. Some survivors of the Chernobyl blast reported seeing this giant scary creature fly away from the reactor after the blast. Many believe that this bird was a paranormal entity that was a harbinger of terrible things to come. Others believe it was just a large stork. I don't know what to believe here, but the idea of a giant paranormal creature that is similar to the one that was seen in the US 20 years before gives me goosebumps in the best way possible. I love monster and ghost lore, which is what brings us to our number 1 spot. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have my favorite, ghosts. That's right, not just named a ghost town because it's abandoned, but also because there are many different spirits that are said to be found here. Andrei Karsukov, a nuclear physicist from New York, told one story after his visit to the area back in 1997. Karsukov reports that he went to the power station one day at 7:30 a.m. and visited the number 4 reactor in the sarcophagus. You know, the big containment unit structure that they should have had on there before the explosion? Yeah, that thing. Well, he could not go inside due to the high levels of radiation, but once he was down there, he could hear screams coming from the inside due to a fire. So what did he do? He ran upstairs to the control room to get help, and once he barged open the door, he was told that he was the first person to open that door in 3 years. He was also told that the only way in was where he was, and if someone came in after him, they would have tripped the alarm.
Starting off this countdown, we have the sarcophagus. Basically, this is a massive steel and concrete structure that covers the Chernobyl power plant. It was designed to help contain the radiation. The construction of the structure lasted for 206 days, and those working on it had to work in shifts of no more than 7 minutes. Any more time spent near the reactors would have killed them. But still, they did sacrifice their lives building this because thousands of workers still died from exposure to the radiation. Those that survived got severely ill, and majority of them developed cancer. Nowadays, the sarcophagus is still there, but it's beginning to crumble. In 2019, they were in the process of dismantling it because it was going to collapse. So a new one is currently being installed. That's probably the scariest thing in Chernobyl because of how deadly the building it's containing is. Coming in at number 9, we have the gas masks, and if you guys are liking this video or want to see part 3, then smash that like button. Chernobyl already looks like the place where an apocalypse occurred. Buildings are completely abandoned, run down, and overgrown with nature. What doesn't help is the piles upon piles of gas masks scattered all throughout Chernobyl. This really adds to the eeriness of this place, and again, makes it look like a place where a zombie or alien takeover occurred. In fact, there is one room inside a school which is just completely filled with child-sized gas masks. It's very creepy, but also sad. Like, imagine how frightened the young children were when this happened. The gas masks found there are just a sad reminder of the horrors that took place there when the reactor exploded. Moving on to number 8, we have the rotting toys. Littered all throughout the city are toys or personal belongings people had to leave behind. The saddest thing to see are pictures of children's toys left behind. Like, I just think that was probably someone's favorite little dolly. Go anywhere there and you'll find items scattered everywhere, now broken and covered in filth. Like, imagine you're rushed out of your home and have to leave behind all your personal belongings. That must have been so hard. I can't imagine how everyone must have felt. It's really depressing to think about. Moving on at number 7, we have the examination chair. So this one is pretty strange, but somehow a gynecologist examination chair ended up in the middle of the woods outside of a hospital. Not only is that super weird, but it's also super creepy. It's all rusted and beat up and looks like an old torture device. Not only that, but that means someone had to go inside the abandoned hospital, find that chair, and then carry it all the way back down and into the woods. I got a lot of questions. Why would someone do this? And how long did it take them to do this? And again, why would someone do this? Either way, it makes for a very spooky encounter. Moving on at number 6, we have the abandoned cooling tower. A partially constructed cooling tower can be found at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They were built to evaporate the cooling water from the 2 new reactors. Sadly, they were never completed. Now, these things are massive. The diameter was over 120 meters and it stands at 150 meters tall. Obviously, after the accident, there was no need to continue on with the construction of this, so the government just left the towers there along with everything else. Eventually, over time, nature will have its way with it and it will start to erode and crumble. It's just crazy seeing all these abandoned infrastructures. Imagine how life would have been if that explosion never happened. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the toxic river. There's a river that's just filled with radioactive water right near the reactor. Scariest part is, despite how toxic the water is, a bunch of aquatic life live there. In particular, giant catfish. Yes, giant catfish. A video from 2016 shows a massive catfish swimming in the water. People originally were like, oh my god, what the heck is that? It must be some sort of mutated animal. Later, it was just found out to be a giant catfish. But still, what the heck? And it's the fact that they have adapted to be able to survive in that highly toxic water. Like, that just baffles me. Not only that, but they can thrive there because the water has no higher predators. Obviously though, you're not allowed to go fishing there. Okay, I feel like that's a given, but I also feel like people would still try it, so I'm just gonna say it. Don't go fishing there. In our 4th spot, we have the jarfish. Speaking of fish, we're gonna go with this. So back in 2016, photographer and journalist Miriam Wazer took a trip to explore the ruins of Chernobyl. While inside an abandoned building, she came across something very creepy and odd. She found a bunch of fish and other specimen in jars. Why someone was collecting fish, it just baffles many. And And they weren't even like proper beakers or science mason jars. No, it looked like someone emptied out their jar of pickles and then used it to store the specimen. I think it's best if those remain untouched. Like, can you imagine how stinky they would be if they were open nowadays? They would reek. Old stinky fish is not something I would ever want to handle. Now the other specimen beside the fish are unknown. No one knows what the heck they are. But if you know, let me know in the comments below. Coming in at number 3, we have the abandoned hospitals. The hospitals at Chernobyl are quite eerie. They're just filled with rusted, empty hospital beds, littered syringes, and more. The walls and floors are cracking, and there's dirt and questionable red marks on the floor. I think the saddest thing though is that these hospitals are often trashed with medical supplies just tossed everywhere. The days after the explosion happened, people were frantically rushing to hospitals. Hospital staff were overwhelmed by the amount of people there. This moment is still preserved in the hospitals to this day. It's pretty dark once you think about it. And at number 2 today we have the Sad Alley. The Sad Alley, or the Alley of Memory, is an alley in the Ukraine created in memory of the villages and residents who had to flee from their homes during the disaster. Basically, it's a walkway with signs lining the sides. These signs are names of cities and villages that had to evacuate and leave everything behind. It's a way to ensure we just never forget the impact that this disaster had. It's really sad. And in our number 1 spot today we have the radioactive spiders. Yes, you heard me correctly. Imagine if Peter Parker got bit by one of these bad guys. He'd be like a weirdly mutated Spider-Man or something like that. But anyways, the spiders in the exclusion zone are radioactive. So you definitely don't want to be bit by one. Oh wait, it gets worse. They also make radioactive webs. Yeah, you heard me, that's a thing. So you don't have to just worry about these spiders, but you have to worry about walking through their deadly webs. Like, what the heck? No thank you. Nuh-uh. I'm not a fan of spiders, but imagine radioactive ones. That sounds like it belongs in a horror movie. Radioactive, radioactive. Starting off this countdown, we have the residents. Believe it or not, but there are people that still live in Chernobyl, even though it's highly dangerous to do so. It's estimated that there are around 130 to 150 people currently living there. Many of them are older women. In fact, they have been given the name Chernobyl's babushkas. Now, you may be wondering, how do they live there when there's no operating grocery store and stuff like that? Well, they live off of the land. They are still farming their family's land. The thing is, the water and soil there is still highly contaminated. So why would they take this risk? Well, one of the elderly ladies featured in a documentary about Chernobyl's babushkas said, and I quote, "Radiation doesn't scare me. Starvation does." After the nuclear disasters, these ladies fled their home, but over the years they have all come back. Despite there being no hospitals or grocery stores, they don't care. They just want to be on their homeland. And turns out their bodies have somewhat adjusted to the high levels of radiation there. In our 9th spot, we have the radioactive animals. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up. The nuclear power plant explosion had a lasting effect on the animals in the area. First off, families had to flee their home and leave their pets behind. As a result, a number of stray dogs that are descendants of those dogs still roam the area. But it's not safe to pet them, no matter how cute they are. And sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life. And many of them have health issues. Another animal that is highly radioactive there are the boars. This is because they eat grubs, tubers, and roots in the soil where the radioactive isotopes have settled. Not only that, but birds and rodents have been found with tumors and cataracts, all from being exposed to the radiation in the area. Coming in at number 8, we have the creepy doll beds. There are a bunch of people who go around Chernobyl purposely trying to make it creepier. They have been given the name the disaster tourists. They have been known to take creepy old dolls and place them on windowsills or hang them from buildings, etc. They also did this really creepy thing in an abandoned school. They rearranged a kindergarten classroom and placed a doll on every single one of those dilapidated dilapidated beds. That literally looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Seriously, out of all the abandoned places there, that one looks like it would for sure be haunted. In our 7th spot today, we have the ghostly figure. There are tons of ghosts that haunt Chernobyl. I mean, any place where a huge tragedy takes place is bound to be haunted. In this case, the ghost was captured on live TV. So Sci-Fi Channel's Destination Truth went to Chernobyl and conducted a number of paranormal investigations. They even went to Reactor 4. While there, they saw a human figure appear on a thermal imaging camera. They believe that that is the soul of a worker that died from the explosion. They also checked out a number of abandoned hospitals and saw multiple figures moving throughout the hospital on the thermal imaging camera as well. Isn't that spooky? Moving on to number 6, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a large mass of black scoria. It's given the name the elephant's foot because it's shaped sort of like an elephant's foot. Now, this thing is highly deadly. It emits high levels of radiation. Anyone exposed to it for minutes could die from radiation poisoning. And guess what? Although it's not as active as it was back in the day, it is still generating heat and still melting down into the base of Chernobyl. Scariest part, if it comes in contact with water, another explosion could occur. Now, eventually the elephant's foot will cool on its own, but even then it will still remain highly radioactive. And no one should ever go near it. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the raccoon dog. This is a really freaking weird animal found in Chernobyl. When people first saw it, they actually thought the radiation caused a dog and a raccoon to just fuse together. Basically, they are found all throughout the exclusion zone, and they are thriving there. It's crazy to see how they have adapted to live in a highly radioactive area. Now, these things are freaking cute. In fact, they are the most observed animals in that area by scientists. Coming in at number 4, we have the firebugs. These are tiny but deadly radioactive bugs. They were discovered back in 2011 when 2 friends were out collecting flowers in the exclusion zone. Don't worry, they were doing this for scientific reasons, to study the pollen, not to just create a deadly radioactive bouquet of flowers. Anyways, while doing so, they came across these firebugs. They then went around collecting hundreds of these bugs, some from areas with higher levels of radiation and some from areas with lower radiation levels. In the end, they found that those exposed to higher levels of radiation had deformities. I mean, yeah, just as you suspected. Either way, you don't want those bad boys crawling on your skin for a number of reasons. In our 3rd spot today, we have the mutated wolves. The wolves from Chernobyl are another animal that are most commonly studied by scientists. In fact, some have been tagged with GPS collars to help track the levels of radioactivity there. Here's the thing. There was this whole scary legend going around that the wolves living there got mutated and were now highly aggressive and massive in size. There were stories being told of these massive wolves hunting down humans and attacking any and every animal. Turns out that this was false. But here's something interesting. Scientists believe that the wolves there have been mating with the dogs there. And in the end, they're creating these large dogs that look like wolves. It's pretty interesting. I want a wolf dog. Another interesting thing is that research has shown that the radiation isn't really affecting them. In fact, the wolf population is thriving there. As a result, they have concluded that humans have a greater negative impact on animals' lives than radiation does. Isn't that insane? It is said that there are around 300 wolves living in the exclusion zone. But again, like all the animals mentioned on this list, they are highly radioactive and dangerous to get close to or even pet. Coming in at number 2, we have the tombs. This is one of the saddest things at Chernobyl. But basically, a number of individuals that got exposed to the radioactive materials and died had to be buried in basically a big concrete coffin. Let's take a look at a man named Vasily Ignatenko. On that day, he went to the roof of the power plant to extinguish the fires. Sadly, he was exposed to a lethal dose of radiation and passed away. He was only 25. Now, his body was still radioactive. So Vasily, along with 27 other firefighters, were buried under big amounts of zinc and concrete. They did this to protect the public from the radiation emitting from their bodies. They were buried all around the reactor. It's really sad that they didn't really actually get a proper burial. I mean, they couldn't. It was too dangerous to go near their bodies. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Blackbird of Chernobyl. According to some survivors of this accident, they claim that shortly before the nuclear plant meltdown, they all experienced nightmares. They also received threatening phone calls and had encountered a huge winged bird creature. Legend goes that these were all warning signs that the disaster was going to happen. The creature they saw was a large creature like a man with huge wings and red eyes. Some even claim they saw it over one of the reactors as it went through the meltdown. This creature has been given the name the Blackbird of Chernobyl. So legend goes, if you were in Chernobyl and you see this creature, then something bad is going to happen.
Coming in first in our number 10 spot are abandoned dolls. So if you guys have ever seen one of my videos before, then you might already know I have a specific disdain for creepy dolls. And wouldn't you know it, the exclusion zone is said to be filled with broken and abandoned dolls at every turn. Apparently, the specific area is Pripyat, and those that have visited report seeing things like baby dolls sitting in abandoned hospitals, creepy dolls sitting on windowsills propped up on skeletal bed frames sprawled out in piles of debris, and the most creepy of all, wearing a gas mask. Now, to be fair, there is a high possibility that while many of these toys are remnants from the actual disaster, there's definitely some tourism interference. But interference or not, many still believe the dolls are haunted. In fact, some visitors swear they've seen the dolls watch them as they walk along the grounds. So whether you are afraid of creepy evil dolls or not, broken dolls without limbs sitting in the middle of a nuclear ghost town is one of my worst nightmares. Coming in at number 9, a natural earthquake. Okay, so I'll start off by saying this might not fully be a creepy encounter, but it's definitely a strange little piece of the puzzle that I had never heard about until now. Apparently back in 1996, there had been a study to explore the possibility of an earthquake being a partial reason for the explosion of Reactor 4. However, experts quickly revealed that report had over 80 discrepancies, and so it was kind of thrown out as a theory. But the following year, in 1997, a separate group of scientists from the United Institute of the Physics of the Earth decided to revisit the study, and they came to an interesting conclusion. So as they reported, the night of April 25th, 1986, which was the night prior to the disaster, 3 nearby geological stations recorded a relatively weak seismic event. Now, normally this probably wouldn't be cause for concern, but according to the study, the earthquake, albeit small, is thought to have occurred a mere 16 seconds prior to the explosion, and could have potentially caused an issue with the proper insertion of the graphite rods designed to protect the reactor, as the facility lacked proper protection from seismic movement. I mean, if nothing else, it's definitely a strange little coincidence. Coming in at number 8, weaponized earthquake. Speaking of earthquakes, inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, there is apparently also some evidence that tectonic weapons were being researched and developed in the Soviet Union at the time. Now, to be clear, it's not known if these weapons were actually ever deployed, but there are some theories out there that suggest that a weaponized earthquake might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. On May 30th, 1992, Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Now, of course, many higher-ups denied this, but some are sure that they saw it with their own eyes. I mean, it is an interesting theory and definitely makes you wonder what could have been going on behind closed doors. Coming in at number 7, faked photography. So believe it or not, Chernobyl is actually a pretty big tourist destination spot. And along with any tourist destination comes many, many photos. Now, there are some pretty famous photos that we associate with the abandoned area. However, according to photographer Darman Richter, a lot of these photos we see aren't actually authentic, but rather a facade created to make money off those who love dark tourism. Richter, who visited Pripyat for his his own photography, said the city was desolate in many ways and still very dangerous. However, a lot of the chilling photos that have become famous online have been manufactured by photographers looking to create the perfect horror shot. Quote, "I observed countless instances of tourists moving these artifacts around or repositioning furniture for a better shot." He then says, quote, "I watched a photographer arrange stuffed bears and little dolls so that they sat in line along the edge of a bare metal framed bed." I mean, it's no secret that we live in a very curated world where everyone is posting their best moments, but something about trying to curate a disaster zone is definitely a very strange thing to think about. Coming in at number 6, immortality seekers. On a little island in Greece called Gavdos, there is an unsuspecting group of 7 Russian scientists who have created a commune and set out for the impossible, immortality. Apparently their founder, Andrei, had been exposed to high amounts of radiation after a voluntary trip to Chernobyl shortly after the blast. Andrei was, of course, advised to go to a clinic in Moscow for treatment. However, believing it was a lost cause, he apparently decided to settle in a small village and live out the rest of his life there. But this is where it gets a little strange. He lived. Now, this is sort of a conspiracy theory, I will admit. However, there are many that believe the scientists chose Gavdos in an attempt to seize control of the Earth and become immortal. The scientists created a tight-knit relationship with the church, and according to a documentary that was being created about the community, quote, "They feel they need to reconstruct the world and implement the birth of a new immortal human." Apparently, the scientists even began building a Greek temple where they aimed to revive Pythagorean philosophy and unearth forgotten Greek mysteries. All of which is said to be in the pursuit of immortality. Which, okay, I know it's all a little far-fetched, but I mean, if it turns out to be true, it would definitely be creepy. Coming in at number 5, Bible predictions. There are a ton of wild predictions out there, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you think that prophets and seers really do see into the future or not. That being said, there are some out there that believe the Chernobyl disaster was actually predicted in the Bible. According to the book of Revelations, quote, "And the third angel sounded the trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, burning as it were a torch, and it fell on the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Now, at first you're probably wondering, what on earth could that have to do with Chernobyl? Well, apparently in Russian, Chernobyl is said to mean wormwood. Now, could this be a coincidence? Sure, but it is definitely a bit strange. On top of that, the fires from reactor 4 have been likened to a torch, and it's believed the third trumpet referred to the accident itself, while the bitter water had to do with radiation. So what do you think? Was disaster predicted in the Bible? Coming in at number 4, mutated farm animals. At first it might sound like something from a science fiction novel, but according to ThoughtCo, just after the disaster, and again in 1989 to 1990, there was a huge spike in malformed farm animals. Many believe this phenomenon coincides with a failure of the sarcophagus, which was a concrete tomb that crews built around the failed reactor in the hope that it would stop leaking radiation or producing deformed farm animals, which, as we know now, didn't quite work out as hoped. Among the mutations seen in the local cattle, pigs, goats, and horses born in the area after the disaster, some suffered from intensely messed up faces, extra limbs, dwarfism, or unnatural colors. In fact, one tiny little piglet became a well-known victim of the radiation. The poor little thing suffered from a mutation called dipgus, which is when they have duplicated lower limbs, and it is definitely not a great sight, I will say that much. I mean, I love little piglets, but this one is definitely giving off more of a creepy horror movie vibe. That being said, you don't need to take my word for it. If you like, you can actually see it for yourself, as it is apparently on display at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. Coming in at number 3, graffiti. While you might think that most people would try to stay as far away as possible from nuclear disaster zones, there are a ton of people that sneak into the exclusion zone all the time. In particular, a group of graffiti artists who left behind some eerie art all over Pripyat, painted to appear as permanent shadows, assumingly like the actual ones left on the buildings in Hiroshima after their respective nuclear attack. Creepy black silhouettes adorn the abandoned city, creeping out everyone who sees them. In one room, a little girl with bows in her pigtails reaches for a light switch, while outside, a boy pulls a toy truck toward the corner of a building. On other walls, the figures appear to dance, and in a separate section, 3 young people are jumping, or as some speculate, floating, holding onto each other in terror. Those that have seen them in person say they're incredibly eerie and haunting, and some have even ventured to say that the spirits of the lost souls could live inside the walls, haunting the tourists who walk past. Coming in at number 2, aliens. There are definitely tons of theories surrounding alien involvement in the Chernobyl disaster, and while most theories are actually on the more positive side, with witnesses claiming they saw aliens stopping the disaster from getting worse, one witness, Michele Reyes, had a slightly different experience. Quote, "I and other people from my team went to the site of the blast at night. We saw a ball of fire and it was slowly flying in the sky. I think the ball was 6 or 8 meters in diameter. Then we saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching towards the 4th unit. The object was some 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted for about 3 minutes. The lights of the object went out and it flew away in the northwestern direction." Now, the question here is, was the alien a part of the other group that people say were here to save the planet? Or were they some kind of rival that was interfering and making matters worse? I mean, honestly, I haven't one sweet clue, but any alleged UFO site is spooky in my books. And last up today in our number 1 spot, the ghosts. Considering that Chernobyl was the location of many deaths, it's not a huge shock that many claim to have witnessed ghosts roaming around the abandoned grounds. But one story in particular really sent shivers down my spine. Andrei Karsakov, a nuclear physicist, was visiting the area back in 1997 and says one morning he arrived at 7:30 and headed over to the number 4 reactor sarcophagus to measure radiation, where the infamous explosion had occurred. Obviously, he was not allowed inside due to the radiation, but as he was taking readings of the radiation from outside, he says he began hearing someone screaming for help from the inside. Quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years. And the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically." He went on to explain that the reactor door also requires a password and a handprint, yet he swore he heard someone screaming for help. Then later that evening, as they were eating, he noticed a floodlight turn on, which should have been impossible since there was no way anyone could be inside. Apparently his colleague tried to ease his suspicions by saying it could have been a power surge, but just as his colleague said that, the light snapped off, as if someone was inside listening to their conversation the whole time.